The most constant celestial body in our sky is obviously the moon. We almost take it for granted that it has been there, well, forever. But what if it has not always been there? Did it somehow get spun off from the Earth? Was it roaming through the solar system before being grabbed and forced to forever encircle us? Or did something altogether apocalyptic happen to bring it into being? In the Bible and most other ancient and religious texts, it is said there was a flood and there was an ark. This brought about a cleansing of the earth, supposedly deliberately by God, to rid this planet of the interbreeding between the watchers and the women of earth, the ark being the salvation of humanity during this epic period. But what is it that caused the flood? Could a comet strike, for example, have caused a worldwide flood? It would need to be some size of comet, but would that alone create a global flood? In computer simulations, we assume this is possible, but just like throwing a stone in the sand, it causes upheaval. It is unclear if it would be global. Sure, a comet would cause an extinction-level event to a certain degree, but would it displace enough water to the point that ancient places would become permanently under so much water that it is hard to reach such depths even today? Or could there have been another event to move the Earth and cause all the oceans to move to other locations? Look at how much water is on the Earth. It is entirely possible that there are massive ruined cities underneath the waves at great depths in the hardest to reach parts of our oceans. The answer may be altogether more obvious and practically staring us in the face. It is foretold, for example, that the moon has not always been part of Earth's system, that the moon was placed where it is today by some ancient, unknown force, giving the Earth its tilt, moving the waters suddenly and cataclysmically, and creating a more stable Earth system and that of seasons and tides to better sustain future life, or the life we see today, as it were. Noah was given 120 years or so to build the ark. Was this the time scale for the repurposing of the moon to become the satellite to the earth? It is stated in Genesis that the Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." You would have to logically think that to have warned in advance of something to come would mean he was waiting on the arrival of something that was coming from afar. Why not just carry out the threat there, and then if he had the power? Of course, it is not that simple. Wait till you hear this. The rhythm of the moon's phases has guided humanity for millennia. For instance, calendar months are roughly equal to the time it takes to go from one full moon to the next. Moon phases and the moon's orbit are mysteries to many. For example, the moon always shows us the same face. That happens because it takes 27.3 days both to rotate on its axis and to orbit Earth. We see either the full moon, half moon, or new moon because the moon reflects sunlight. And by the way, it is bigger than Pluto, who in itself has 5 moons. Crazy, right? There are various theories about how the moon was created, but recent theories suggest it formed when a huge collision tore a chunk off Earth away. The leading explanation for how the moon formed was that a giant impact knocked off the raw ingredients for the moon off the primitive molten Earth and into orbit. Scientists have suggested the impactor was roughly 10% the mass of Earth, about the size of Mars. However, rock samples that returned with Apollo astronauts from the moon indicate that the Earth and the moon are not one and the same, meaning the moon came from elsewhere. That brings us to the well-established theory that the Nibiru system collided with a planet that was between Mars and Jupiter, smashing half of it to pieces, creating the asteroid belt. The other half was captured in Earth's gravitational field, giving us the moon. The Sumerians do speak about this planet Nibiru and the collision that took place, and unlike other so-called scientific theories, this one is documented. They even speak of the inhabitants of the planet, which, as you know, are referred to as the Anunnaki. So this sort of theory does hold more precedence compared to the understanding of the moon always having been there, and it also would explain the greatest enigmas in that of the ancient lost civilizations and the Great Flood. To further interpret the Genesis warning, we must also conclude what Nibiru was, and how the Anunnaki were able to create such destruction and accurately park the moon in Earth's orbit. So Nibiru is described in Sumerian texts as the wandering planet. The Anunnaki are the inhabitants, and the moon, known as Tiamat, apparently came in the tail of a great comet. To us it sounds like Nibiru is some sort of spaceship with a huge weapon for these kinds of undertakings. And the tail of the comet was in fact the spacecraft bringing the moon. And get this, in the religion of ancient Babylon, Tiamat is a primordial goddess of the salt sea, mating with Abzu, the god of freshwater, to produce younger gods. She is the symbol of the chaos of primordial creation. She is referred to as a woman and described as the glistening one. It is suggested that there are two parts to the Tiamat mythos. The first, in which Tiamat is a creator goddess through a sacred marriage between salt and fresh water, peacefully creating the cosmos through successive generations. In the second, Tiamat is considered the monstrous embodiment of primordial chaos. Some sources identify her with images of a sea serpent or dragon. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, she gives birth to the first generation of deities. Her husband Apsu, correctly assuming they are planning to kill him and usurp his throne, later makes war upon them and is killed. Enraged, she too wars upon her husband's murderers, taking on the form of a massive sea dragon. She is then slain by Enki's son, the storm god Marduk, but not before she had brought forth the monsters of the Mesopotamian pantheon, including the first dragons, whose bodies she filled with poison instead of blood. Marduk then forms heavens and the earth from her divided body. This is a direct reference to both the creation of the moon and the Great Flood epic. It is also notable that it was Enki who warned Noah of the impending flood that led to the savior of humanity and allowed our survival. It is absolutely astonishing to think that these events were documented thousands of years ago and can literally all be connected through interpretation. In ancient legend, it is foretold that of these events took place. They were not telling stories, they were telling history, trying to speak about things that happened and keep it alive. They tell us there is no proof for such things to have happened, yet it is documented. And if we are to believe this rather than believe the scientific theories, then it is notable to consider that everything suddenly starts making sense. The moon is anomalous, alright, because it didn't form naturally with the Earth. It came from somewhere else, probably between Mars and Jupiter. We don't ever see 40% of the moon. The so-called dark side is unseen by humankind. There have been some strange goings-on reported during the Apollo program, in particular during a radio blackout as the astronauts orbited across this unknown area. Maybe that was the inspiration for Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon album. In Zulu legends, it is believed that the moon is hollow and the home of the Python, a race of intelligent extraterrestrials. Stories said that the Earth was very different than it is now. There weren't any seasons, and the planet was perpetually engulfed by a canopy of water vapor. People did not feel the strong glare of the sun that we do now, and they could only see it through a watery mist. The water canopy fell to the Earth as a cataclysm of rain when the moon was put into place in the Earth's orbit. This is symbolized in the Bible when it rains for 40 days and 40 nights. The arrival of the moon and the Anunnaki changed everything on Earth. It modified the Earth's rotation and angle. The Earth turned over on its axis as we are upside down, as the legend says, and brought more powerful tidal systems that once had been much calmer. Zulus and other native African accounts say it was built far, far away to keep an eye on people, and as a vehicle to travel the universe. Zulus say that the great mothership is the moon, and that's where they escaped to during the cataclysm of the Great Flood, which they had caused by manipulating the moon and creating other cosmic events. In this sense, the Zulus are suggesting that the Great Ark was not a boat, but a space-going vessel. In July 1970, two Russian scientists published an article in the Soviet journal Sputnik entitled, "Is the Moon the Creation of Alien Intelligence?" They advanced the theory that the moon is not a completely natural world, but a planetoid that was hollowed out in the far reaches of space by intelligent beings possessing a technology far superior to ours, using a comet to tow it to the Earth. Huge machines were used to melt rock and form large cavities within the moon, spewing the molten refuse on the surface. Protected by a hole-like inner shell plus a reconstructed outer shell of metallic rocky junk, this gigantic craft was steered through the cosmos and finally parked in orbit around the Earth. Plus, the moon is far older than previously expected. The oldest age of the Earth is estimated to be 4.6 billion years old. Moon rocks were dated at 5.3 billion years old, and the dust upon which they were resting was at least another billion years older. On March 7th, 1971, lunar instruments placed by the astronauts recorded a vapor cloud of water passing across the surface of the moon. The cloud lasted 14 hours and covered an area of about 100 square miles. The moon's crust is much harder than presumed. Remember the extreme difficulty the astronauts encountered when they tried to drill into the Maria. Surprise! The Maria is composed primarily of ilmenite, a mineral containing large amounts of titanium, the same metal used to fabricate the hulls of deep diving submarines and the skin of the SR-71 Blackbird. Uranium-236 and Neptunium-237, elements not found in nature on Earth, were discovered in lunar rocks. So was rough-proof iron particles. It is from these discoveries that countries around the world have set out to explore asteroids. Our moon is the only moon in the solar system, and indeed in the universe, from which we have observed to date, that has a stationary, near-perfect circular orbit. Stranger still, the moon's center of mass is about 6,000 feet closer to the Earth than its geometric center, which should cause wobbling. But the moon's bulge is on the far side of the moon, away from the Earth. And that means that something had to have put the moon in orbit with its precise altitude, course, and speed, further supporting the idea that the moon came to Earth and caused the ancient cataclysm. We will leave it at that for now, guys. You can let us know in the comments what you are thinking.